The gentlemen over the Hate Bit podcast were talking about what's more important with video games. Is it story or is it gameplay? And I thought this was a very interesting discussion because you always hear this come up in arguments when people play video games. You have those who solely prefer gameplay, and then you have those who solely prefer story. So what's the right or wrong answer here? Well, there's not one, to be honest, and it kind of depends on the game that you are playing. Take, for instance, an RPG. RPGs are very story-driven. RPGs are very driven by their worlds, driven by their characters. There's something in there that has to keep the player immersed. You have to at least care about your characters. You have to at least care about the world that's going around you, the story, to invest time into it. You could have an RPG with the greatest gameplay ever, but if it's lacking a great story, you're just not going to be that interested in it. One game that comes to mind that actually did this for me was Mass Effect Andromeda. Mass Effect Andromeda has some really solid gameplay. It probably has some of the best in the series. But what hindered my enjoyment from it was I didn't care about the characters or the story. I got to this point where I'm just like, it's not going anywhere. These characters aren't doing anything for me. I'm not enjoying the characters as much this time around. I'm not enjoying the story. There was no desire for me to really continue on with Mass Effect Andromeda. So despite it having some great gameplay, the gameplay in itself was not enough to keep pushing me through to play this game. I eventually just had to beat the story in hopes that the characters at the end of the game would grow on me, and that would give me the incentive that I needed to push through the game. But it just didn't happen. And ultimately, I decided not to finish Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, another game that came out recently was Persona 5. Persona 5 also being an RPG. But Persona 5, on the contrary, has a really great story, has some really great characters, has really great world design, and I would even go as far to say some really great sound design. All of these are key factors into why I enjoyed Persona 5 so much. Remove any one of those key factors, and it would be just another generic game. The gameplay is great. I really enjoy the gameplay. But without its characters and without its story or without its world design, you remove any of those, it just becomes another generic video game. There's something about the way the characters are written, the story's written, that can keep pressing you forward in the game. Very much the type of game that it is. The story and the characters take the center point. When you spend so much time socializing with characters, getting to know these characters, you have to have a game that is solely based around characters. So definitely, depending on the type of game, yes, a story in a video game very much does matter. Now, on the flip side of things, when does gameplay specifically matter? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. Another game I've been playing recently is Ukulele, and I'll give you guys my thoughts on Ukulele here in a little while when I actually get my review done. But for the most part, Ukulele is a 3D platformer. Not much needs to be known other than that. You simply go around and collect things. The characters aren't anything grand. The characters aren't anything epic. The characters are not there to tell a grand epic narrative. They're just more or less there as the creatures that you play in the game to go through to beat it, to go through and collect these items. Its world design and its world choice and its gameplay is where you're going to get the most benefit out of it. It's like you don't go play a Mario game solely for the story. It's just not going to happen. Mario has never been known for having great stories, nor does it need to be. Mario is strictly a 3D platformer. What matters most in a Mario game is the world design and the platforming elements, which comes down to the gameplay. The gameplay is what drives you to play it. That's where the fun is with a platformer. That's where the fun is with that specific type of game. That argument could even be made for Call of Duty. While I'm sure there are people out there who do enjoy Call of Duty's campaign, its stories are never great epic narratives to begin with. They follow a very general direction, and a lot of reasons people enjoy Call of Duty is for the gameplay. That online gameplay, that online experience that they get, that factors into why they are playing Call of Duty. So like I said, it very much depends on the type of game that you're talking about. Now, the last game here I'm actually going to talk about is Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is one of my favorite video games of all time. My favorite entry in the Final Fantasy series. So, what can I say about Final Fantasy IX? Well, as much as I enjoy the gameplay, you were to remove the characters, remove the story, remove the world design, and just kind of make a bland experience, this game would not be as great as it was. Its characters are what bring it to life. Its writing, its story, its world design. It all factors into making this great game. Alone, the gameplay just would not work. You'd get bored shuffling through menu after menu and just having a bland story. There'd be nothing to drive me through with this game had it not been for the story. The combat would grow old if that was the only focus that you were specifically doing. If they turned this into just nothing but a dungeon crawler with no story whatsoever, no general direction of where you were going, and just said, alright, here, you got this combat, go explore this world, fight some monsters, beat the final boss at the end. No story or anything, no dialogue, the game would become a grind pretty quickly. So it really does depend on where you personally, what personally games you enjoy, or what type of game you are playing. They also went on to talk a little bit about sound design, and I thought that was very interesting because sound design is something, like they said in the 8-Bit podcast, and I'm going to leave a link down to that below, but in the 8-Bit podcast, sound design is something very interesting because it does get taken for granted, like they said. A lot of people don't so much think about the different sounds that gunshots fire off, the different sounds when someone walks on grass or walks on stone, and all that sound design goes into. They called the person who does the sound design the unsung hero, and this is true. You know, it got me thinking. Final Fantasy XIII was a prime example for this for me. When it comes to sound design, if you've ever just kind of listened to Final Fantasy XIII and how, especially when you hit Grand Pulse, how when you walk on different things, different sounds come from the footsteps. They really took a lot of time in making this environment feel alive. And that's something in video games that really does get taken for granted. You know, you remove the sound design, you know, what have you got? A really shitty game. If the sound design just doesn't go with the game, you know, it lacks in a lot of ways. Razor Fist talked about Thief and how Thief actually relies on listening to the enemy footsteps to find out where they were, because unlike Metal Gear Solid or other stealth games, the enemies don't appear on a little mini-map or have a radar. You know, you gotta really pay attention to that footsteps to try and find out where your enemy is. So gameplay and story are great, and side by side they can make some great gameplay elements. You can have a great game with great gameplay and a great story. But if you have a game with great gameplay and no story, it can hinder your ability to enjoy the game. Gameplay is not always something that makes a great game. Sometimes you have to have it accompanied by a great story in order to enjoy it, especially depending on the type of game that it is. If you're playing an RPG, like I said, that is a must. You have to care about the characters. The characters have to achieve something, accomplish something, connect to you as the player. The story has to grab your interest for you to continue on in the world. If it doesn't, you're going to get bored awfully fast, even though the gameplay is really, really great. Whereas sometimes story is not so prevalent in video games because it's not the initial factor that they were going for when creating a game. Simply just like I said, a Mario game is not going to have a great story. We've just become accustomed to that, we know it, we expect it, and that's not what we play a Mario game for. Thoughts, opinions, leave that down below in the comment box. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys prefer story over gameplay? Do you think it depends on the type of game? Let me know down below. This is a discussion that I think needs to be talked about. It's a very interesting concept. Thoughts, opinions down below. You guys have been watching The Spoony Bard. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Links down below in the description. Be sure to hit subscribe there for me. New content will come your way. And most importantly, stay happy, be happy, game happy. The Spoony Bard is checking out.